Have you ever heard of the overlapping generation teaching of the Jehovah's Witnesses? No? Maybe. You may be, like me, completely confused about what this means. So I tried to test it for myself to see whether an ordinary JW would understand what an overlapping generation is. It was a quiet afternoon. After I parked my car, I walked slowly to where they were seated. I greeted them, and then I dropped a bombshell. These ladies were probably the age of my mother. They were quite orderly, arguing with them a little bit difficult culturally. Now, when I was asking this question, I wasn't really trying to trap anyone. I was trying to genuinely understand for my benefit, but also to try to see the extent to which ordinary Jehovah's Witnesses understand this doctrine. I explained to them that I've been wondering about this topic of an overlapping generation. I've not understood. Can you help me actually understand what the overlapping generation is? Welcome to Dr. K, a channel on which we discuss matters of theological nature, no matter how complex, difficult, and uncomfortable they might be. Because on Tell Me Dr. K, we tackle any topic of popular demand. Now, for those of you who may not know where this overlapping generation comes from, it was believed then by Rutherford, who succeeded Charles Tazo Russo, the founder of the Jehovah's Witnesses, that the 1914 generation would see the end of the world. In other words, that they would not die. So there was a magazine that was published in 1984, and it was written, The Generation That Will Not Pass Away. So you can see on the screen there, that is the cover of the Watchtower magazine. That generation has all been wiped out, yet the end is nowhere in sight. So the Jehovah's Witnesses in 2010 came up with the concept of an overlapping generation. So that's where we are. That is the background. Since the first generation died, and that generation was very important to the end of this system of things, as the Jehovah's Witnesses put it, and this generation was part of the anointed. And so I posed that question. So one of the ladies, let's us call Sister A, responded to me and said, the problem is that it's very difficult for you to actually understand when you start at the top. The reason you don't understand is because you don't have a background. You need to start with basics. Just like in school, you don't start teaching a child advanced topics. You start with the basics. That's why you don't understand. So I said, well, that's why I'm here. I would like you to help me understand what that overlapping generation is all about. Now, I realized, maybe I'm wrong, but I realized that the elder lady may not have fully understood what the overlapping generation is. Now, what is interesting is that Jehovah's Witnesses always have a script. They have rehearsed answers to all sorts of questions. So when you ask them a question that is outside the script, it becomes very difficult. And especially a question that is coming from somebody who has intimate knowledge of their doctrines. The other lady, who seemed to be more calm and more friendly, and I sat next to her when the third lady and left a plastic chair for me to sit on. So she began to explain what the generation is all about. In fact, what she first did was I asked a follow-up question when she tried to explain about this overlapping generation. And I said, if the first generation died, the JW were confident the first generation will not die until the end comes, but that generation has died. How sure are you that the overlapping generation will also not die before the end of the world? And the lady said, no. Before the overlapping generation dies, the end would have come. So I said, but how can you be so sure? She said, no, I'm very, very sure. So I wasn't trying to be confrontational, and I tried to avoid arguing the way I argue with maybe the male folks and the younger ones. Now here's just a brief audio clip of what she said. The issue is that there is a teaching about overlapping generation. Because what I know is that from 1914, there's a generation of the 1914 that was said that that generation was not going to die, but that generation died. Then the governing body changed and said No, there is an overlapping generation. Yeah. So now that's the one I fail to understand in terms of overlapping. What does it really mean when we say an overlapping generation? That's a question I wanted to understand. How can I explain to another person about an overlapping generation? Who is part of the overlapping generation?
So now, this is what Mama was saying, that sometimes once we get things from kuchibirira pakati, and then upeza kuti kwamevichokera didn't get it properly. So even kwamene chienda, you will not get it.
Okay, so Mom, you can just explain to me and say what the overlapping generation means is this. If you are enjoying this video, kindly do me a favor, like, subscribe, and hit the notice bell so that you may receive a notification when I upload a new video.
Here we go. And the understanding that the generation of 1914, the generation of 1914, it's not everyone who is going to do what to die. It's not everyone who is going to do what
until Armageddon comes.
Exactly. You get it, Now, here we are. We say that if people who were there in 1914,
they have all died.
They have all gone. You have seen that? So now, from all these, they have gone. Because if they are there, then they are 100 and chap. So now here we go. We find that this generation has done what? Has gone. They are no longer there. And then here comes a generation. You see that time? From this generation, there is another generation which has come. So now this generation which has come, they are the people now who are going to reach Armageddon, not those who were there in 1914.
Okay. So what is the overlap? What is the overlapping here? Where are they over? Because overlapping is like this goes on the other. Then I asked, who is really the overlapping generation? Then I explained to her, I said, my grandfather was born 1912, and I overlapped with him for about 28 years before he died. If my grandfather was Jehovah's Witnesses and was anointed, and I'm also a Jehovah's Witness and anointed, do I qualify to be part of the overlapping generation? Before I ask that question, the other lady, the one we are calling Sister A, actually walked away to go and attend to a young lady who had passed by looking at the literature card. Sister B remained. I said, do I potentially qualify to be part of the overlapping generation? She said, no. Only your mother qualifies to be part of the overlapping generation. So I said, but I overlapped with my grandfather. So there's a time when my grandfather lived and I also lived. So I believe that I overlapped with him. She said, no, you can't be part of that overlapping generation. Now here's just a brief audio clip of what she said. Okay, let me give my example. My grandfather and I was brought up by my grandfather. My grandfather was born in 1912. So now because I lived with my grandfather, just an example, can potentially be part of an overlapping generation?
No.
So haven't we overlapped? Haven't we overlapped? So who?
Not you.
Not me, but but my mother.
Yes.
My mother.
Yes.
My mother can overlap.
Yes.
So now, what are you going to do? Because my mother is dead, my father is also dead, and that generation is also going to
end.
So, what are you going to come up with an overlapping generation?
No. Because where we are going now, it's no other generations are going to generate.
Are you sure, Mom? Are you sure that
if you look at things, the way they are going, the way they are moving, we are not going to have another there.
Ma'am, is it not that doctrine of 1914 is actually not true? Because if it is not true, they miscalculated. Otherwise, if it was true, truly that generation, Christ should have started ruling on earth by the end. Because how sure are we that they won't change again, that there is another generation, overlapping generation.
No, just as I have told you. No.
So she tried to explain. Now, afterwards, when she said I could not be part of the overlapping generation, only my mother can be, since I was talking about my paternal grandparents. So what the lady now did, she pulled out a tablet, went to a section where the definition of generation is explained on the jw.org, and she began to read to me slowly what a generation is, explained, went on to the first generation that existed when Christ was alive. The fulfillment was made in AD 70. All that had really nothing to do with the overlapping generation. So I realized that this concept of overlapping generation, no matter how seasoned the Jehovah's Witness is still confusing, not just to outsiders, but also to Jehovah's Witnesses. Now let's listen to David explain how he explains the generation of 1914, the overlapping generation. In fact, this other man who is the helper to the governing body, when he talked about this generation, he actually couldn't really go in detail. Probably he also didn't understand. So he just said, let's go back to what David explained. He explained it so well. He just crossed over to David Splain's presentation, which had been done earlier.
In the April 15, 2010 issue of the Watchtower, it said of Jesus, he evidently meant that the lives of the anointed who were in hand when the sign began to become evident in 1914 would overlap with the lives of other anointed ones who would see the start of the Great Tribulation. And then later, it was in January 15, 2014, that this more precise description that Brother Splain shared with us was itemized for us. The second group of anointed ones would overlap. They were contemporaries with the first group from 1914 onward. But to refresh your memory on our current understanding, let's have Brother Splain review that chart again that summarizes the details of this generation.
Would you like an easy way to keep the generation straight? An easy way is to consider the situation of Brother Fred W. Franz. Now, you'll see that he's FWF on the chart. Now, as we said before, Brother Franz was born in 1893. He was baptized in November of 1913. So, as one of the Lord's anointed in 1914, he saw the sign and he understood what the sign meant. Now, Brother Franz lived a long life. He finished his earthly course at 99 years of age in 1992. Now, do you know of many who were of the anointed in 1914 and who outlived Brother Franz? There may have been some, but not many. Now, just for the sake of argument, suppose that we assume that Brother Franz was the last of that first group of anointed ones. That is, the group of anointed ones who were anointed in 1914, who saw the sign, and then continued serving faithfully. Now, we're not saying Brother Franz was. We just don't know. But for the sake of argument, let's suppose. In order to be part of this generation, someone would have had to have been anointed before 1992, because he would have to have been a contemporary of some of the first group. Now, again, we're not saying that Brother Franz was the last of this group, but we're just using this for the sake of argument as a point of reference. Anyone anointed after 1992 would be of the anointed, but he would not be part of this generation. And Jesus said, this generation will not pass away until all these things happen.
Now, the reason they came up with the overlapping generation was to still keep that prophecy alive. We are living in the last days. And because Matthew 24 says this generation will not pass until these things happen, they still have to say, because that generation died, then this generation also includes the overlapping generation, that those people who are anointed, but who also live together with those who were of the first generation. So this is actually changing the goalposts to make a prophecy that is total fraud alive. Because if they don't come up with a new explanation of the 1914, the whole foundation of the Jehovah's Witnesses doctrine falls apart, because everything they teach hinges and depends on the 1914 generation. All the threats are based on the 1914 generation or the 1914 date. So first, it was this generation won't pass away, and that generation passed away. So meaning that from just right there, that prophecy was not a true prophecy. Whether you call prophecy or prediction, that was not true. Now we take it as a prophecy because the governing body claims to be the channel of communication. So it becomes a prophecy, and they claim to be anointed, although they say they are neither infallible nor inspired.
Well, knowing this, then we are not embarrassed about adjustments that are made, nor is an apology needed for not getting it exactly right previously. And also, the governing body is neither inspired nor infallible, and so it can err in doctrinal matters or in organizational direction.
But they claim to be the only ones anointed enough to interpret Scripture. So my conclusion, basically, by that interaction with the ladies, is that they were not very clear of what the overlapping generation is. Because what the other lady was explaining when she came back, Sister A, when she came back to explain, she was contradicting the friend. And then I just said, I think what you're saying is not clear. What your colleague was saying is a little bit clearer than what you're saying. Now, if you want to really understand what the overlapping generation is all about, the official version of the overlapping generation, you need to watch part 2 of this episode. There you are. So that is my encounter with the senior Jehovah's Witnesses ladies who couldn't really satisfy me with their explanation of what an overlapping generation is. And instead of actually explaining what an overlapping generation is, she began to explain to me what a generation is. Do you have an understanding of what an overlapping generation is if you are not a Jehovah's Witness? And if you are a Jehovah's Witness, what is your understanding of an overlapping generation? And do you think that this overlapping generation shall be fulfilled, that before this overlapping generation dies, the end will have come? Because most of the JWs who have been watching my videos, they seem to be overly confident of the very end. And some of them have been threatening me with the end because of the videos that I've been doing, that I am in serious danger. You see what will happen to you. You will not escape when this end comes, which is Armageddon. What do you think of this overlapping generation? Is it really a correct prophecy or a reinterpretation, a cover-up of the failed prophecies of the 1914? Drop your comments below. If you have enjoyed this video, kindly do me a favor, like, subscribe, and smash the notice bell so that when I upload a new video, you'll receive a notification. If you have a question to continue to part 2 of this video, click on this link to watch other videos that have dealt with the end, particularly dealing with Armageddon. Click on this link to watch the video about the 144,000, which is also related. Click on this link.